where it starts, the photon. From where we start our discussion. We have spoken often when we speak about theory of architecture, but our job is a very concrete one. We deal with reality. Everything deals with the reality. Even the most theoretical position of the architects, if they don't deal with some result, they are unuseful, in my opinion. It's my opinion. All that I will tell you is personal, of course, as everything in architecture. So I think that the start of our reflection should be material. Matter and material, which is not the same thing. What is material in architecture? In my opinion, material is the interpretation of a matter. And I will try to explain what I mean with this. What is matter? Matter is the substance of which the universe is composed. Everything is matter. If you want to think through a process, the simple way is to think what you will do if you really are in that situation. So try to imagine you are a primitive man, you don't know anything about material. You face the nature, which is composed by matter, not material. So you see the tree, you see the stone, you see the clay, for example, and you don't know what that mean from architectural point of view. You are not an architect. You are a human being lost on the earth, and you don't know what to do. So you start, first thing, to recognize the quality of the matter and the aptitude of the matter to be transformed. This is not in my opinion. In any religion, in any legend, interpretation, tales about the origin of the world, there is always a God which transforms chaos in an organized set of matter. The transformation of chaos in cosmos. Cosmos is organized. If you take, for example, we are in Rome, the Roman Latin literature, Ovidius, all the poets and writers which has interpreted the origin of the world, they always say that there was a God who recognized the quality of the air, which is life, of the fire, which burns, of the air, which is solid, of the water, which is liquid. And when he gave this quality to the matter, they became material. This is the first act of the creation. And as architects, we always speak about our creative work, but I am contrary to this. We don't create, we transform. God creates. But if there is one operation in which we create, is this one, to recognize the quality of matter and also the material. And this is the original interpretation of the form. This is not banal, because if you take a book of design, in which way you must do the design, first of all you think to the idea, and after you think in which way to realize this idea. So I make a design, and after could be in concrete, but also in steel, and why not also with bricks. It depends from the structure, the resistance of the material, and so on. I have seen recently the design of a very good architect, one of the best in Rome, which was designed a church in concrete, but was difficult for the realization and is made in steel. I think that we must respect the material. We recognize in the matter the, opportunity to be transformed. So the rock, you can understand there are the diaclasis, the fracture, line of fracture. And the man see the rock with diaclasis and say, this is a tile which I can use reassembly to make a wall. There is no intervention by the man. It's not change it, you just take and reassemble. You can also transform. But the core of the discussion of this man is that you, your conscience, your interpretation transform the matter in material, not the operation you make on the matter. If you have a stone and you think that the stone is a seed, this is a seed. You don't transform, you just sit there and you have recognized the quality of the matter transformed in material. So I just put it some image of clay. There is nothing. It's just something standing on the landscape. But I can understand that the clay has an aptitude, has some character. It feels to be transformed very easily and after cooked, burned, to form, for example, bricks. So there is a first phase of recognition and a second phase of eventual transformation. So I propose this example of the clay because the first complete transformation of matter in material, in structure, in architecture is the pottery. The way the man interpreted the clay to make an object useful to use, a pot. A pot is a complete architecture because it posed the question, the problem of the, for the first time, of the relationship of the object with the universe. In which way the object is in relation with all the other objects, with the universe. And the first act, the first, reason men do is the problem of vertical axis, which is the point, and which influenced all the architecture, even contemporary architecture, and the plane, which are not recognized at the same time. It's quite easier to understand the verticality of the poles. You leave a stone, it goes straight. So there is a vertical. The horizontal is very difficult. The man conquered the idea, the notion of a horizontal plane very late. It's demonstrated by the use of the tripod as an ancient chair or table. With 3 points, you can have a plane, not depending from the position of the point. If you have 4 points, you must have the 4th point exactly in a position, otherwise it's not a plane. So it's a very sophisticated, technology and way of thinking, very natural, very late days. So, as architects now, we try to recognize the form of the pot. And as architects, trying to redesign. Like if, as architect, we pose the problem for the first time. What I have to do, if I have clay, and I have some liquid, for example, which I want to preserve, to be contained in some object. So this is a very early example of pottery, Etruscan, 6th century before Christ. One of the first major experiments. Why I say major? Because it has got a form. It's an architecture. And is, I could say, an aesthetic synthesis. The man who has done this pot has not just thought to the function. All the parts they are linked together to give an expression at the end. So, how I can investigate the form and understand the part from which the form is formed, thinking to the forming process. So, I am a man that for the first time posed the problem of obtaining a pot or some form of container for water, say. So, at the beginning, I have no idea of the relationship of the object with the universe. I just want something to contain. So I can make a logical, not historical, reconstruction of the pot. A brief history of the pots in the universe. And first of all, the first form don't have an axis, the amphora, which is made more or less like that. And I fix in the air. This is there. The form of the amphora is not made to stand. It's made to be fixed in the air. Of course, for many reasons, for the cold which arrives from the earth and so on. But in our reasonment, is the first example in which I don't have an axis. But very soon I conquer the notion of vertical axis with the scutula, the Egyptian scutula, which stand vertically and don't pose the problem of horizontality. So, I can have I say Egyptian scutula because the one is one of the first example, which is more or less like that. And is standing vertically, hanging on a rope. But after I pose the problem of the complete pot, the problem of pot, first of all, I try to have the container, the liquid, which could be more or less like this. And after I have the vertical alignment, like this, so it's all symmetrical, but I must pose a base to rest on a flat surface, like this. So you see that in the confused magma of the matter, I start to distinguish parts. I distinguish an order. That's one of the goals of the architecture. To understand the order, even if I will contradict the order, but I must understand which is the order of the matter and the material to understand the form. Otherwise we have the informal, was the subject of yesterday of Pliny, the informal, which is the way of losing the form. No? So I have a first hierarchy of elements I have the base. I have this one which I can call elevation. And after I have something which unify all the form like this, the color, and after I have a conclusion like this. Of course, I could have also an handle. It depends from the different culture, something like that. So I have 4 lines. One is elevation, 4 let's say component of the composition: base, elevation, unification, conclusion. And this is, surely you have noticed, exactly the composition of the order. You think immediately to the Greek order, but not only the Greek, but any order. If you go in China, the pillar is organized in the same way, like the Greek column has a base, an elevation, a chapter, and an architrave. It's a need, I could say, a natural order to which, as architect, we give a code. Note that the codification of the Greek order was not produced by the Greeks. The Greeks never thought to an order. The codification was a product of Italian Renaissance, in which the text, the theories, they stated that the relationship between the different parts should be this, and this. So you see that the order which we recognize inside the pot is a general order which we can also recognize. For example, as we will see a palazzo in which you have a base with a window and so on, an elevation, base, elevation, unification that you need to put together even statically all the part of the palazzo, and the conclusion, which is a roof. All these 4 parts always recall. So, of course, we are speaking of form in general, in architecture. The architecture has many scales. But all the scales, they are linked together, even from the point of view of the interpretation. The way in which I can interpret the pot is the way in which I can interpret the territory. I am exaggerating a little bit to be clear, but it's like that. And I will try to demonstrate it. Now, of course, I don't pretend to explain you in a few minutes in which way we can understand the territory. But I want to give you an idea about the way we as architects interpret the territory. Territory is architecture, like the pot is architecture for us. And all are parts related with an order, a relationship or necessity between the different elements. You have seen this morning with the lecture by Professor Ortolani, how the territory and the composition of territory, the geology even of the territory, has influenced the form of the city. And we will see that not only has influenced the form of the city, has determined the form of the city. Of course, with the critical interpretation of the map. But the road that you have seen on the map as Bufalini in the 16th, 17th, 18th century, the ridge of the hill, which were transformed in road, they still stand today. They were pre-Roman. They were due to tribes, the Latin, the many tribes which arrived in Rome from different ridges, and they are still there. The Quirinale is still a ridge road. So, how to interpret this landscape from an architectural point of view? Also here, we have different parts. It's not homogeneous. As architect, we can say there is a valley, there is a ridge, there are mountains, there is a main ridge here, more or less. There are other ridges, smaller, going toward the valley, and this is a first attempt to make a differentiation inside the landscape. The recognition could be critical and personal, but it's useful. Maybe it doesn't correspond exactly to a scientific definition. We are not scientists. But many things that we do that are not science, they are useful for orientation, to start to think about, think to the star in the night. The navigator, the first navigator, they distinguished the different constellations. There was the bear, another constellation, were invented, but they were useful. You must, as architect or as navigator, give a shape to things. Of course, I am a little bit also exaggerating because the shape you attribute to the landscape and to the territory is concrete, it's real. So we started to distinguish some part of the territory. So a main ridge here and secondary ridge here going toward the valley. And after the valley, which is a basin in which there is, at the bottom, always a river, a stream, something which contains the water flowing toward the bottom of the valley. We can't avoid this. So, also now, we have two things: to be a primitive man belonging to a primitive tribe, and to see in which way is developed the form of the territory. We are speaking about forms. This is a form. So, I rush a little bit because we are late. So, we can say that this is the typical form of the territory. It's abstract. It's my sketch, just to say that we have a main ridge and secondary ridge. Of course, the reality is much more complicated. This is a scheme, just to give an idea. But what I can do, if I have, for example, like it happened in Italy when there were the migration of the Latins or the tribes going through the peninsula, what they do, where they can pass, is a question. Where you think that if you are a Latin, 700th century before Christ, and you have to go from the edge to Calabria in the south, where you pass? To the valley? To the where? To the valley. Yeah. We are a civilization of valleys. So we can't understand that the origin of civilization is the mountain. Because we live in the valley, which were obtained through hard work. Because the valley at the beginning were flooded, swamp. There was not organization of the water. It's very difficult to maintain a valley not flooded. So the first I think anybody who has some familiarity with mountain know that if you don't want to be lost, you have to go on the ridge. Because on the ridge and on the main ridge, because on the ridge, first of all, you avoid the water. And after you avoid to cross continuously the secondary ridge. And after it's more continuous. You can go straight without going the valley, going up, down, and so on. No?
But I was going to say the opposite.
Here, if you
Giuseppe, scusa, se posso dire, mi permetto di suggerire di non accelerare la lezione, magari la spezzi in due parti, perché io penso che sia troppo importante.
Grazie.
No.
Matteo generously is saying don't cut the lecture because it's important and to make 2 lectures. But we have a schedule very.
Fa il pomeriggio l'altra parte.
Okay, we see what we can do. Anyway, to reply to your question, you see there on the top is continuous. No?
No, in this example, yes, but I was thinking the image you showed before with like a real landscape.
Yeah.
Sometimes the ridge ends and then you have a new hill or a new mountain. Or if you go through the valley, you can always find kind of flat place.
Yeah. You are perfectly right. This is a scheme. Like everywhere in morphology. In morphology, we think to a general type, considering, admitting that there are enormous quantity of variants, even contradicting, but it's like the star for the navigator. You must have the general idea. Generally, it works like that. And you can demonstrate, for example, in Italy, with the military maps, which here we have from the 1870. So it was a period in which we can assume that was very close to the original shape. And it proved that there are, and we can see, I suppose that I have put it some slide about the territory in Italy. Really it worked like that, because it's true that you can find interruption, but you always choose the best way. The best way is not straight, has difficulties, maybe that sometimes you have to cross the valley. And we gave to this crossing a name because it is very frequent. It's a kind of type, which is the synthetic road, which synthetically joined. But more or less, the condition is this, in theory. So, what I can do to avoid the valley, I pass here on the ridge. I go here, and so on. So, can I found a village, a settlement here? I arrive in a place that I like. There is a nice landscape. So I said, okay, I stop here, and the first settlement is organized here. Is possible? Is possible?
Yeah.
No. No. Why is not possible? Because who has said this? Yeah. Of course, there is no water. There is no water. Because if you think to the cross section here, sorry, we have lost. If you think to a cross section here, you have something like that. And imagine here the man, the poor man walking and going toward south. There is no water and the poor man is dying. So what he do? He say, God, please give me water, and God generally give water. And I said, okay, finally I have water. But the water flow in one side and the other. And the other part of the water, the filter inside the earth, and yes, no water stop there. Where water stop? In a layer here of semi-permeable material. Semi-permeable. So don't go any longer. Some part flow along the semi-permeable layer, and here you have the sources. Of course, you can say, but maybe the sources are not there, they are lower. Maybe the sources are in another place. No problem, I move. I am looking for that. But always we must try to see the general in the particular. I was arranged before a map to demonstrate, but it's hard to do. It takes much time to demonstrate that it works also in Toscana, in the take to verify Google Earth, and have a look at the end of this explanation to the forming of the Lepsian settlement, that they work always like this. They are very different one from the other, but if you have in mind the general, you understand the particular, and you find that there is a general law, which is not the law of the mathematics. It's a general, I have to say, the spirit of the territory for which things they happen in that way. So, what can do the man? Instead of staying here, he can take a secondary ridge, arriving here in the layer which is the layer of the sources. And here it's possible to found a settlement, very rough settlement without a precise form, but is the origin of the culture, of the individual specific culture of a civilization, of a settlement, of a city, because there is a part of the territory which is subject to a culture. Culture as growing the fruits, but also culture as specific language, religion, way of cooking, art, and so on. This is the origin. Because you see that it starts the notion of pertinent area. This settlement is separate from the other, from a stream here, and the part of the territory which very difficult to validate, to pass through. It's difficult to make a road here. While if I go along, while if I go along this road, it's very simple because I have something like that. I stay here and there is the slope and I go quietly along the slope. In the other case, I have to cut a piece of mountain or hill to put here, so I have earth, escape, air reported, and here I obtain a road. which is a very sophisticated operation, very difficult to do. So the connection between this settlement will be very late in time, when they start to have a sophisticated economy. They don't produce autonomously for themselves everything, but they start to produce, for example, pot. They are very skilled to produce pot. So they exchange with Apple, because the Apple of the neighborhood, the neighbor settlement, they are very good. So, and they start to produce a road here, provisional, uncertain, but it's a road to communicate, and also the other, to connect the different settlements. I don't want to confuse you, the mind with definition and names. It's important that you understand the general way of interpretation of the form. So, you see that there is a cultural area here, another here, another here, and so on. But, of course, the man who has occupied this part of the territory want also to arrive to control the valley and go on from the place which is safe and go here to found a city, not a true real city, but a structure organized by a hierarchy of roads. So I reproduce here. You arrive here, main road. You can have secondary road. You have to think to the protection of the site, because when you are high in the mountain, there are no enemy. The exchange, they are more quiet and relaxed. But when you go in the valley, in where the life is more dense, because there are also people arriving from the sea. You don't see just to descend to the valley, but there are also people who arrive in the valley and go on the mountain. So the scheme is much more complicated than this. I am simplified much. But we can think that they arrive in the low part of the promontory, and they start, say, something like that. This is flat. So you say, why is flat? Maybe it's not flat. They search for a place which fits with their need. So first of all, water, the other flat as possible, of course not completely, and possible to defend. The best is if you find a place in which 3 of the site, they are defended by the nature. No? If here you have rock, it's enough that you build a small wall here, complete the nature, and it's defended. You understand what I mean? So in the center I will have the road, which arrive. Generally, in the first phase here, there is always a stream or a small temple or something which gives the reason for right there. And after, other roads, secondary road, we call these matrix road, and the other building roads. But this is not very important, we will see later. The problem is the fourth wall, which should be really fortified, with a city gate protected by tower and so on. But this is the first phase, and it's very easy to recognize in the actual dwelling, village, small cities in Italy. Because here you have a changing of the tissue. Just because from here they depart in other, those here. Those roads, no? So if you have the settlement here, you have a main road here, but also other roads going from this side. And here will be organized a new fabric, a bulbous, something which belongs to the external part of the city, external to the wall. The wall will be demolished probably and build another one. So just to have an idea, see this example very clear, but you can see on Google Maps most of the settlement in the Lechon area are like this, and you see how, for example, here the first phase, without knowing the history of the site, I don't say that it's unuseful, the history, the evidence of cartography and so on is very important, but you can have a first idea, because here surely had been the first gateway. This was protected by the nature. You see how deep are the valley, here and here. And after, from this place, there is sure a road going, connecting other small city or villages, which have been used for to build the tissue. Another one is here, that probably is the Ridge Road, and another, and so on. So you have also this, which is completely different, you see, but the main, you say, ratio, the main rational reason for which the shape is this, that there was a nucleus, was a ridge road here, which arrived to a castle, in this case, a small fabric, and after the fabric was organized along the ridge road, and here there is another road, planned, and so on. So just to say that it's not the theory or interpretation of the text, which is much more complicated. But just to give you the idea that the form could be investigated rationally, and from the form we can derive some general observation about the structure. We are not investigating just the form, but the structure. So, I am a little bit afraid about time, because it's 1:15, and the lecture will take about 2-3 hours. So if you can avoid, no, I'm joking. No, really is a problem, because we started late. So we don't have much time. So the option are, or I rush and present you something to have an idea, or we stop here and you have an idea of the relationship between form and visualization. Because otherwise we have to stay here until 2. We go on? Yeah? You are convinced? Okay, so I now try quickly to demonstrate to you us from the territory to the building. There are some passages which we can understand as form, and we can interpret it as a structure. And I will demonstrate, you make a sacrifice, but at the end you will have the satisfaction to understand for the first time in your life the Venetian Palazzo, about which you have read a lot of things, but the true interpretation of the Venetian Palazzo you will know today. So, I am joking, of course. Don't take it too seriously. So, this is a first form of organization of the valley. I told you that it's quite complicated to organize the valley. You have to organize the water, the pipe to drain water and so on. This is an example in the region just close to Venice, the way in which the Roman organized the temple with the so-called centuriazzi. They subdivided the territory in centurie, you see, which were at the same time the way to drain the water, but also to make a partition of the soil, but also a way to organize the street and road and coast, the connection between. So they has got a certain fixed dimension, which is this one. The centurie, 2,400 pedes, feet, foot, and the Roman foot was more or less 30 centimeters. And you see the other measure, which were for agriculture as usual, which was a dimension for the work of the cows and so on. Heredium, which means heritage in some way, because it was the path which, of course, was transmitted to the daughter, son, and so on. And after, we arrive to the dimension which fit with the numbers, which are the actus, which is, you see, a quarter of the heredium, and half of the actus is exactly the dimension of the domus, which was the courtyard house employed used by the Roman for construction of the cities. So you see that the dimension derives straight from the dimension of the territory. We are all connected. So I will propose quickly the example of Venice. What happened in Venice? There arrived some people who wanted to colonize a place which was water, not deep water, shallow water, but in which they had to build some platform to build houses. So they hasn't got many books. There were, population which lived mostly on the Po Valley. So they were Romanized, and they know just the partition of soil of this kind. They hasn't got book, television, or other information. So they just know this kind of housing, which was I made the drawing here. You have the space to build the domus, and anything like that. You choose the best orientation towards south or southeast. 60 feet fit very well with 3 cells, 3 rooms. So this is the elementary domus, which is explained rationally very, very simply. All the rooms, they are oriented in the same way, in the best way, just for the reason that externally they cannot open windows. So the shape is this. You have some example in the inland, you see here, in Albiolo in this case. The first phase is this, more or less, in the origin, 3 cells, and after they start to fill the other part. So what happened in Venice? In Venice it happened more or less the same phenomenon. They start to build the platform, and they organize the dimension in such a way that they can build the domes. But a different domes, because they has got the water, and inland there was not water. So they will arrive to the domes, not from the street, but from the water, and they must pass through the domes. So they organize, you see, different type of domes like this, for example, with the shore, and you must pass through. Another one like this, which is enlarged toward the shore. Another with the canal in one side and the other, and so on. So there are many ways of arranging the domes depending from the situation. But the result is something like that. You have fabric of domes. You see, domes. So, how they are arranging these domes and why they are different from the inland time? For this, you have the loft, which is more or less like this. Here you don't have land, you have the canal, you have water. So imagine that the south is in this direction. You start to put the first room in this position, occupying one part of the surface that you have organized. You have made the platform, you have made the ensign, and so on. This is the first phase. In the second phase, you start to build also here. You can imagine that the first part is for the family, and the second part, for example, for storage. They are all, from the social point of view, quite homogeneous. There is not the capital, they are not capitalists. So all these houses, they are more or less the same. So maybe that the part for housing is larger, the other is a little bit smaller. But going on in time, the house will change. First of all, here you form an axis, and this is the main difference from the inland domes. There is a road, because you have to go from the water to the inland. So all this part should remain void, and is a passage, is an axis. And in time, they will occupy also the last part here. And it happened that in a certain period of the history of the city, the social condition changes. It starts the investment of capitals. There is the trading in all the Mediterranean. You know that the Venetian, they has colony everywhere, in Turkey, everywhere, and also the Genoese and so on. So large capital, people who own 50 ships, very rich, and can transform these domes in a palazzo. And other people who became always very poor, more and more, and work. They are not any longer fishermen, but they are sailors, very badly paid in the ship. So they can't own such a large house. So in this period, for social reason, the transformation of the types share into, from one side the palazzos, from the other side we call pseudo row house, because these houses, they transform all this cell, you see, they transform in houses. You must think that here there is another house with other cell like this. So this became a small road, the Rio, and these very, very small houses, pseudo-row houses. But the capitalist, the rich man, the owner of the ship, or anyway, a rich man, can organize in a different way all the domus, transforming it in palazzo. He tends to cover this part with beams, and this will become the Sala Veneta, the center, the main hall of the house. And notice that the wood employed is large, put it in this direction, leaving the possibility of having all this part of the facade very, very light. You understand? Here, this last beam is quite not load bearing. It carry very, very, not important load. So I can arrange this with the polyphora, something we don't carry much. And this is the memory of an open space. And the other one, they arrange it, with opening, like in any masonry building, having a solid part here, A, a very transparent part here, B, and the third part, C, solid, which different dimension. So this explains, here you have the roof, this explains the origin of the facade. This is a scheme, and you see the scheme here, the three parts. Of course, A has a dimension, C has a dimension. The facade need an architect to make a synthesis. He tried to make all the parts equilibrate and similar and the symmetry, but it doesn't succeed completely. So if we see as tourists this facade, we see the symmetry, but we see as architect, and we have in mind the origin of the type, we distinguish very clearly the diverse parts. And in fact, you have, as a result, this. Now, even with these very few hints I gave you, you can recognize the meaning of this facade, in which you have the preservation of the central part, which is transparent, and which is the memory, the sign of an open space. Is a language, and this language you can distinguish. One part will belong to the history of the palazzo, you see here. You explain why there are two columns so close one to the other, why this part is so light, why this is masonry, or this part, why the span is different. You see, the span between the windows here is much larger than here, because they belong to different phases, and so on. You can interpret all the part of this form as originated by a structure. And it's what we must do as architects. You are not allowed to see a facade in Venice like a tourist. It's like the craftsman who make the pot. You can go in the shop and say, okay, it's very nice, why don't buy the pot? But the pottery man, the craftsman who produced pottery, he must understand the structure. Like the musician must understand the structure and the way one piece of Mozart is played, or badly or in a different way, interpreted. So we have to see this. I mean, this example because it's very easy. But any facade, we try to learn even to understand the facade here in room. Yeah? But we must interpret this facade as the the writer read a novel. Understanding a structure, there is a beginning, there is an end, and there is a structure of the, or a painter, there is a structure of the painting. So, okay, I have uploaded also an example of my design, my project, to demonstrate how it's possible to interpret the real reality and obtaining the design. But it's very late, I think we can avoid it. It's 1.5. No, I think that they are fine. Maybe we will have another occasion. Okay, but
so for this typology, like why the first construction started from the left side? Is there some reason behind?
Why the left side is different from the right
No,
one?
why the left side was the first construction? Because from
Well, I don't say it's the first, probably, because if you organize the space for living, generally, you are more generous than for storage. So generally, the part which is towards south is smaller, but always in the real reality, it happens also the contrary. Someone who wants to have large space for storage because he's a big fisherman, like, I don't know. But generally, the larger is for housing. But this is not important. The important thing is that they are diachronic. They testify of a diachronic process of forming. Diachronic means in time, different in time. First there is a phase, after there is another phase.
I don't mean the science, exactly the process, like you showed in the diagram. If you go back to the diagram, that's the first beginning of construction. Yeah, for this one.
See
The first,
here?
like the domus ambientale started from the left.
Yeah.
Is there
Imagine that this is the part for housing. 3 cells like this, masonry, and here you have the windows. After you start to build the other part here, which is for storage. I say storage generally interpreting the process. Could be also for housing, but surely it's diachronic, because they don't build everything in the same time. There is a forming process. And after the things, they are a little bit more complicated, as I have proposed you, and is formed, you see, a porch here, and after it became an inner space of the house, and after it's covered, you see. This is the example of the pseudo house, with the calle inside, the road, and this is the formation of the palazzo.
Why start from the left? Why start from the left?
Well, because the first thing we spoke about ISO orientation. All the row house, all the culture house, they are oriented in the same way, more or less. There is no man so crazy that turn the housing to north, because it's the worst direction, there is no sun. So just because you have just one possibility, because you have 3 parts of the cell of the room blind, you can choose the orientation of the 4th wall, with the opening of the 4th wall, you choose the sun. Also, this is a generalization. because most of the houses in south of Italy, they are southeast, not exactly south. The south is not the best in some part of Italy, and also North Africa is quite the same. Yes, the first investigation was made by Muratori, the famous Pernoperante Urbana di Venezia, and after there was a very nice book written by Paolo Maretto, with an introduction by Caniggia, in which is presented more or less the interpretation. This interpretation is evident. I don't know if there is someone of you that is not convinced of this process. It's so logical and so demonstrated by the evidence of built reality that we must accept the truth. But when the book, Sylvain, when the book about Venice was published by Maretto, you know that there were a lot in any magazine of critics saying that this was invented. You know, on Casabella there was a terrible review of the book. So to say that sometimes the theory and interpretation of the architect, they are bizarre.
Yes, epistemology, the foundation like epistemology, they get, because before this there is no any evidence. They guess epistemology or not?
They?
Yes. Yes, they
Yes.
Ipotizzare, immaginare, supporre.
They guess the typology.
yeah.
No,
Is this proof?
So, they ask a typology. The type was a discussion was yesterday by Fyodor, is an a priori. Before building a courtyard house, you have the notion of courtyard house. It's a layer in your memory which emerges when you make the design. But it's not invented, of course. It's not something that they produce as an invention, or otherwise. We can say that it's an invention in the etymological meaning. You know what means invenire in Latin? In Latin, venire, from which derived invention, means to find. So the invention is something that you find while you make the research. It's not something that you produce from nothing. You can't produce from nothing. So, surely there is a critical part in your mind when you make a building like that. There is a part, most part of the construction, your notion of house, which belong to the type. You know that courtyard house, they are built in such a way that you have an entrance, shop, and so on. After you arrive in Venice, you adapt your idea critically to the condition. You know that you arrive from the water and you have to go to inland, terraferma. You must cross the house, and this means much because it's the start of forming of an axis passing through the house, which is the axis which remain also in the palazzo. Look, this for example is Palazzo Vendramin Calergi by Cudusci, very well known palazzo and this is the Sala Veneta. This is an axis, which is the origin in the fact that you must cross completely the space, just because crossing the space you reach the lane. So, okay. Thank you very much. Now